Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be talking to you about how to use the box model and divs within your HTML and CSS so that you can create a layout that you're interested in. So let's get started. The video that I'm showing you, or web page that I created, is a piece for Paula Scher, who is one of the designers you had to choose from. You'll notice that I have all these colored boxes everywhere. I'm using what's called the box model so that I can lay out my information and then put contents in it. So I'm going to pop to these two drawings that I created first, rough sketches. The first one is my thumbnail sketch, and you see that I was going to put her name at the top, a bio or some kind of text with a photograph with a divider bar just for design, a sample of her work, some more text in a column, a divider line, and then three boxes. I said I was going to put a list in them, design, and then contact, or an unordered list. I just made three photos for the sake of the demonstration. I then added another ruled line and my name at the bottom of that. So what the box model means is that you create an overarching box and set of containers for everything to live inside of. So what I've done is essentially, this would be my header. If you look, I've just created a square rectangle around where her name would be. I created two boxes where the bio and the headshot would be. There's my ruled line. There's another box for the sample, more text, ruled line, and then three boxes. What I'm also doing, which you'll see in this demonstration, is I created a box that goes around the two columns so that I can organize them in relation to each other. That same box setup is used to go around these two, and then I created another box to go around these three so that I can organize my information efficiently. So if you go from what my rough sketch looked like to my box model, it's highly encouraged for you to create your box model first with no content, because if you can make your boxes work, you can put content inside them. Now you're looking at mine with content already in it, but you at the top, her name is just within a div. You'll see that in a moment. I'm not going to keep these colored boxes that are all just random sort of wacky colors. Instead, I used colors in them so I could see if they were actually working. And you see here, there's something gone awry and I have no margin between those two. So behind them, behind her, I have this great big medium green box. That tells me that each of those frames or sections or squares or divs, so the outer ring, the green is a div, the yellow is a div, the peach is a div. So they're all separate divs. So you have to think in that kind of concept so that you know what you're containing. So it's containers within containers within containers. Then I've got my ruled line. Then I've got this container or wrapper. They call them different things, or box, that is around the next box and the next box. Ultimately, I'm getting rid of all of those. I just wanted you to be able to see that it's easiest to set the boxes up first. If they're working, you're in good shape and you can go ahead and start putting content in them. So I'm going to go to our HTML and CSS. And you've got your videos with the header, and what to do within the head. I've got the title there, which shows up as the folder tab on my HTML page. I have the link to the style sheet. I have the link to the fonts that I used, that I got from Google Fonts. Close the head, start the body. The first thing I did was create a div for the header. So whenever you see it laid out like this, div space class equals quote, a name of something, a quote, that is what you've named it over in your CSS. So you can set up, based on that box model, you can set up, I'm going to bring that back over, you can set everything up in your CSS to match what's going on here. Let's see if I can move it a little bit. You can see both. So I started at the top and I made a background color for everything, which is the light green. I told my width of the web page to be 1000 pixels. Then for the image, and you may or may not have done this for your sample page, but for the image, I wanted it to be centered. So this was the code to center the image. And because the center tag no longer works in HTML5. And the dumb thing I did, ideally, you should make all of your photos the intended output size using Photoshop before you even bring them in here. I was being lazy today, and so I had to resize all of my photos in order to use them in these boxes. Ideally, you know what size those boxes are, and you make your photos the correct size first. But I've told anything that has an IMG tag, which is your image, they'll be centered and they'll be 75% of their actual size. Again, I should have done it from the get-go. Then here is my header. And in the header, I told it that I want it to be this font dancing script that I'd gotten from Google Fonts. I want it to be 200 pixels, and I want it to be this color. Notice when I'm writing divs, it's dot, and then whatever you're calling it. I could call this blue elephant. It doesn't matter what I name it. You have to name it something that makes sense for you. So to me, it's the header, so I named it header. And these are the only things that I wanted to put in it or behind it. I could add all kinds of things if I wanted, but I don't want anything else there. The next thing I have is my H1, which these are your display sizes. So I just put in 3 different fonts. Normally you're going to stick with something that looks good together, and usually you don't use more than 2 fonts because you don't want them to create a conflicting message. But I've got the 3 different ones just so you could see it. And then I actually used a 4th. So I've got 5 fonts specified. It's really not a good design decision, but just to show you how things change and work. And oops, you'll notice here that I have my font family. That doesn't go there. That goes here. And my font size. There's multiple ways you can type in size. For our purposes and for beginning, you're using pixels. So I'll say 18 pixels, and then we'll have to see what happens. Let me save that and pop this back to the front. So set up all of this first. Technically, you can do this before you do any of your HTML work. Now, I wanted to create a box that would hold these 2 columns, just like that. So I have a big box that goes around them. I'm then going to use that same box around these 2, and then I'm going to make a new box for these 3. So while I have these 2 here, I created a box called a div dot 2 column. I find it easier not to have underscores between the words or dashes or anything else. I just run everything together in lowercase letters. I've given it a position of relative, which means it will function alongside. I can organize it the way that I want to. I picked a background color. The width is 1000. Notice that width matches the width of the entire body, my whole page. So 1000 pixels wide. I had to play around a while to get the height of the pixels because I didn't know what size those photos were. Remember, I winged it. If you know what size your photos are, you're not winging it. I have a margin of 10 pixels. And when I only put the 1 there, when you do margins, it's top, right, bottom, left. If you only put 1 number there, it's going to apply that to all 4 sides. And I put padding, which is the space between the image and the edge, at 10 pixels as well. So that's for just this column here, which would impact That's this medium green that goes around her photo and this first blurb here. So that's 2 column. And then within it, I have that left side and I have the right side. You could call it left column, but that would confuse me because I've got 2 column as the title. So then it's left and right. So dot left, dot right. Whoops, let's go back to that. And notice I didn't make them 50%. If I have margins or padding and I make this 50%, it takes up more than 50% because of these items. So I have to play around and adjust these figures on left and right until I have something that works. The height I made automatic so that it's whatever height it needs to be for the contents. I float left. It sounds like this side should be float left and this side should be float right. They're both float left. Float left means I'm going to go next to this last object. I'm going to go left to the next object. So everything, even though it's right, it also has to float left. I have background colors. These I'll ultimately get rid of. I just put them in there so that I can see if it's working before I do it. I did put a font family in there, a font size, margins, padding. For the right, I pretty much copied and pasted this, except I changed the background color. Everything else is the same. Then if you move down and you see my ruled line there, the HR, the horizontal rule, which I do have in here, I can just delete that because it wasn't working. It didn't have the flexibility of just using a box. So I created dot rectangle, which I'll call over in the HTML. I gave it a background color of this very dark green. I told it to be 80% of the width of my page, which if you recall is 1,000 pixels. I gave it a height of 20 pixels. That was my choice, how thick I wanted it. And then I wanted a margin on the top and bottom. I didn't want the next items to touch them. So I already made the 2 column. I don't have to make it again with new names. I'm just going to use the one that I had created up here. So now I'm going to come down here for this one, and I made 3 column. Position relative, there's my background, there's that width again at 1,000 pixels. The height, I had to play a lot with my numbers until I got the height that worked with the photos I had. I've got a margin and I've got padding. So whatever is, notice then I have left 3, middle, and right 3. So those work with 3 column. Whereas above here, left and right worked with 2 column. I like to keep my code together so I know what's impacting what and I can see exactly what I'm doing. So remember this width was 49%, but if I come down here, the width now, I was having a lot of trouble with the percentages, and you notice I use percents. I can use percents, I can use pixels, I can use some other things too, but we won't talk about those now. So I knew my page was 1,000 pixels wide. So I started with 333 and for each width. And notice I had to go down to 320 in order to get something to work. And that again is because I have on a margin and I have on padding. So essentially those 3 are exactly the same, except I switched colors of the boxes so that I could see them and tell that they weren't running together. So let's pop back to our page again. So I can do all this coding before I even go do my HTML. And then you see, here's how everything lays out. Now, this is probably too big. I can tweak it. This image is larger than this. That's okay. And I could go deeper and deeper. I could decide that these are not just called, so for the right column, now I would have to make another because here this right column has a photo and takes up more space. And this one has text and is taking up a little less space. I could put a margin on the right column. So I've got margin left. Let's see if I put on a margin right, margin top, and I'll say 25 pixels. I'd make sure you always put the semicolon. I'll save it, pop back, and refresh. And you see that it popped it down a little bit. So I could move those things around if I wanted to try and center it. Now, if I wanted them, so notice though, then you're kind of going, oh, well, the margin on that one's really awful because it should be lower as well, but I can't lower this one because it's too big and it would fall off and outside of the block. So you could make this right lower. You could just call it something else and then use it in your HTML instead of if it works on the top or the bottom. You can go deeper, 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 adding direction to more and more of these. So that's my CSS. That's what I needed for absolutely everything that's on this page. And if before we finish, I will go through and get rid of those boxes so you see what it looks like. Now let's look at your HTML. So I've got all my links. I start at the body. Here, center, you're supposed to be able to work center into your columns and into your divs. I have a lot of trouble with it. It almost never wants to work. So center is one of the few styling tags that I'll still use inside HTML just because I know it works if I do that. So let's compare things. So right now I said div space class equals quote header quote and caret. So the header then says, okay, anything you type in here should be done in dancing script at 200 pixels in this color. And then I have to close that div and I close that center. So I encourage you to do one step at a time. Go back there, refresh it, check it to make sure it works. That's what I did all afternoon today when I was creating this page for you. Then roll down and I've got div class 2 column. So I come in here and 2 column, notice I have nothing typed within it. I immediately give another div class, which is called left. There's my width, height, etc. And I center it immediately. Close my center, close my div. Now technically, div class 2 column also needs to be closed. If I click on that div and keep going, there's its close tag because I closed that box after I put in the right column information, which was this image of Paula Scher. It's in an images folder, so I had to put images / Paula Scher. Notice it's centered as well, and that div is closed. Then I can close the whole div, which was 2 column. Next, I wanted to center that rectangle that I created, and my rectangle is right here. The background color, width, height, margin, etc. So center, open, center, close, div class, open. I'll put this down here so it's easier to see. Div class, close. Next, 2 column. So I come right back up here. This time I switched sides, so I have text and image. Now I have image and text for the next one. So I switched it, and on the left is the image, the right is that text. And I just copied and pasted anything random in here. Notice again, div class, I don't need all those spaces, 2 column, and then its close tag is after the second column's information. And then there's a div left, which has the image, and a div right, which has my text. I move down, I copied and pasted that rectangle from above. And technically, I can copy and paste when it worked the first time and just replace the content. It's a little easier. Now here, I had to use div class 3 column, And then you'll notice, because it's only photos, it's a shorter chunk of text. So here's its close tag. Then inside I have left 3 gets 1 image, closes. Middle gets an image, closes. Right 3 gets an image and closes. Then I've got my last ruled line, and I've got a paragraph, and my P tag, I think, is up towards the top. P tag is up here, and I used overpass in 18 pixels and purple. So this is not simple. You just have to go really slowly and check things one by one by one. Now, if I just pop back here, let's show you how I can get rid of all of these background colors. I'll come over here. So they're basically spacers, but it's easy to see it. So I'm going to go to 2 column, and I'm going to delete that background color. I'm going to go to left, delete that color. Right, same thing, delete these. So I use them to know, rectangle, I want it there. I use these to know, is my code actually working? So it's just a trick to see your code and find where the error is. Because if no color shows up in those boxes, then there's something else wrong. So I'll save this, I'll come back here, refresh, and now you see that information looking more organized on the page. And there actually is a little, let me shrink my window. It didn't end right there. There's the little bit that of the end. So I used those just to get my layout on the screen, and it worked quite nicely. So I'll put some screenshots of this code in your D2L as well. I don't want you to copy my layout exactly as it is. I want you to use this concept and then code it yourself. And remember, slow and steady wins the race with code. Even though I know what I'm doing, it did take me several hours this afternoon to do this because I was messing around with the photos and my box sizes weren't working. So I just had to keep trying different sizes. That's kind of the nature of this software. It just is what it is. So slow and steady wins the race. Thank you.